Bible teacher Carlos Carrillo. Get ready to study your Bible.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Are You Ready? I hope you're having a very blessed evening wherever you may be around the world. We're so happy. We have a very special guest tonight. I'm excited to have Dr. Peter Vincent Pry back. And before we get started, and we got lots of questions, we got some very new information that he wants to share with us. And please, as you listen, ask God to give you discernment. Listen, pay attention, and please share this video. If you're watching this video for the first time, you watch Are You Ready for the first time, please subscribe to Are You Ready? Click notification and share this video with as many people as possible. All right. Well, once again, thank you for joining us on Are You Ready? We're very blessed tonight to have once again with us Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, very well known dealing with EMP, but and other matters, and we're going to talk about those tonight. But before we get started, I would like him to please, if he could, Dr. Pry, thank you once again to be on our program. And please, for those who may not know who you are, if you could introduce yourself before we get started.
Sure. I've spent my whole professional career on weapons of mass destruction. First at the CIA, where I was the senior strategist on Russian, first Soviet and then later Russian nuclear weapons and strategy. Then I worked for the professional staff of the House Armed Services Committee, advising the 60 members of Congress on nuclear weapons, terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, ran hearings on electromagnetic pulse and cyber warfare for them. Then I served for 17 years as the chief of staff of the Congressional EMP Commission, developing plans to protect this country against the EMP, yes, plans which unfortunately have not yet been implemented. And now I'm the executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, which basically is a successor to the EMP Commission. And we carry on the fight to try to protect our military and our civilian critical infrastructures like the electric power grid from EMP threats, cyber warfare, sabotage, and nuclear issues as well.
Excellent. You have a lot of experience, a lot of things you'll be able to share with the people here who are watching around the world. Before we get started, because you sent me an email, and you mentioned this is one of the articles you have done. It says, Russia, war is inevitable, cyber warfare. It has Putin on there, if you can see him. And then I think you also did one Washington Times, lessons of the China-India Blackout War. You did that also most recently. And I read them. I mean, it's a lot of info, a lot of stuff you covered. And so, I mean, we want to get right into it so we can go through these articles. If we could start with Russia, if that's okay with you. We can start with Russia. Okay. One of the things as I was reading through this, and if I can quote from here, it says Margarita Simoyan. She's like a Russian media person, correct?
Yes, she's the director of the media giants RT and Sputnik, and a personal friend and advisor to Vladimir Putin. And so,
close advisor to Putin, correct?
Pardon?
Close advisor to Putin.
Yes, he has awarded her several medals on regular occasions. I mean, she's in a way the top propagandist for Russia, but also a chief spokesman, for Russia when they want to send us a message that is unofficial, so that they'll have plausible deniability. They'll oftentimes trot her out.
So they go to her when there's unofficial information. Because they do have usually there's a press secretary. There's a lady who's usually the one that's always talking. That's
Yeah,
not her.
but in this case, no, that's not her. She's the she's the director of RT and of Sputnik. Uh, it's sort of like our major CBS, NBC, CNN. Uh, uh, Imagine if those were all one big corporation, and there was one director who controlled all of them. That's where she would be. These are state-run media, by the way. I mean, RT and Sputnik are not independent news sources. They are funded and basically the official state media. But in this case, when they want to do something, for example, send us a message, as in this case in the article, threatening to invade Ukraine, threatening a world war against the United States, but they want to make it seem like it's not an official Russian government person doing it. So it's not the defense minister or Putin himself. They'll do it through her. That's one of the avenues of having plausible deniability, so that they can say, well, it's just kind of like your director of CNN coming out and saying these things.
And talking.
She doesn't say anything that the Russian government doesn't want her to say.
Okay, and I want to read this, and if you can explain what she said here. She said, Russia will invade Ukraine, sparking a conflict with the U.S. that will force entire cities into blackouts, all-out cyber warfare, nationwide forced blackouts. She describes a fated war to come against the U.S. So she is saying mostly more of a cyber war than a nuclear war. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. In fact, in the interview, she says they won't even need to use their nukes. Of course, their definition of a cyber warfare is much broader than ours. They don't consider the use of a nuclear weapon to make an EMP attack to be a nuclear attack. So their definition of a cyber warfare, it would include things like logic bombs and bugs, and energetic bear, dragonfly, the usual things that we think of as cyber warfare using cyber weapons. But it would also include, it could include physical sabotage, special forces teams, a handful of guys running around shooting up extra high voltage transformers in the United States and control centers. And the ultimate cyber weapon, in their view, is the ability to do a nuclear EMP attack. They don't consider that a nuclear attack. It's considered a cyber attack or an information warfare attack or an electronic warfare attack. And that actually makes sense in terms of the physics, because when you use a nuclear weapon for EMP, it's not like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. There's no blast that reaches the ground. It's detonated at very high altitude, up in outer space, at the altitude that satellites orbit at, in the vacuum of space. And if you were standing on the ground directly beneath the explosion, you wouldn't hear anything because it's going off in the vacuum of space. You might not even see it on a bright day or on a cloudy day. No blast would reach the Earth. No radioactive fallout would reach the Earth. The only thing it makes is the electromagnetic pulse, which is like a super energetic radio wave. But this radio wave is so powerful, and it can cover enormous. One weapon detonated over the center of the United States, for example, can create an EMP field over all 48 contiguous United States and destroy electronics across that whole area. It doesn't directly kill people. The wave, the EMP, would pass harmlessly through your body. So you wouldn't even know that was happening. Wow. But then, when you went to try to start your car wouldn't work. There'd be no water coming out of your faucet, your refrigerator. None of your electronics would work. It's a way of subtracting from the equation of our civilization all of the electronics that we've developed. And we are an electronic civilization. We can't support 330 million Americans. Our military won't work if the electronics are destroyed and the electric grid collapses. The electronics in airplanes and missiles and tanks, all of those potentially, could be destroyed. So when she speaks of a cyber war and that we don't even need the nukes, she means We don't even need the nukes to blow up cities or to attack your military forces by blast. She's not ruling out, the possibility of doing the EMP. Although, frankly, they might not need to do a nuclear EMP attack because our electric grid is so fragile that that just doing a classic cyber warfare attack the way we understand cyber warfare, which is the way China did to India at Mumbai, which is the second article that we're going to talk about later, I guess.
Right. Yes.
They could do that to us too. China didn't need an EMP attack; it did it purely with a cyber attack, blacked out a city of 20 million people, and clearly demonstrated the capability to black out the entire Indian grid. That's what they could do.
Now, when she says cyber war, is there any way? I mean, this is just a question. Is there any way that the U.S. can be prepared before they do it, like being covertly having an inkling that it's coming? Or do you think that we wouldn't even have a chance to even prepare for something that's like that coming?
Certainly have a chance to prepare, but not at the last minute. If we implemented, for example, President Trump's several executive orders to protect our grid and our critical infrastructures from EMP, one of the most important of which critical executive orders, the Biden administration announced today it is canceling. All right. If we followed the original plan that had been laid out in the Trump administration, yes. Now it could take a long time to implement. If we did it on a crash basis, though, we could accomplish much in a year. And this Biden administration, I mean, it's just incredibly contradictory. After Margarita Simonian, who is the Russian director that made these threats on behalf of Russia, after she did those things, the Biden administration announced, they leaked a plan, a National Security Council plan, to the press, saying that they're starting a 100-day sprint and that they're going to accomplish a lot in the next 100 days to protect our electric grid, from cyber warfare. But then today, I mean, that was last week. Today, they announced the suspension of this executive order from the Trump administration.
Oh, boy.
It's foundational to achieving cybersecurity. So it's a huge contradiction. It was a good thing for them to announce that they were going to launch this 100-day sprint and give high priority to this. But then they contradict themselves by, sort of destroying their own credibility, by eliminating the executive order that is arguably the most important executive order for achieving the goal that they seek. But that's a long-winded answer. Yes, if we take time, and invest in compel the utilities to do what is necessary, and don't trust the utilities. This should be supervised by our experts in the Department of Defense, and Department of Homeland Security, who really understand cyber warfare and EMP. The utilities have no competence in that area, despite their claims that they do. We have seen them fail over and over again. They're not even competent to protect Texas from an ice storm, or to protect California from high winds that blow down their power lines and cause wildfires and burn up. If they can't do simple things like that, you can't trust them to protect against EMP and cyber warfare. So the adults have to go in, and oversee that the utilities are doing the right thing, and that they're going to, and I wouldn't even trust utilities to do it. We need the defense contractors who harden systems against EMP for the military to go into those utilities. I'd be glad to have the government pay for it, so it won't even cost them anything. Okay,
right?
They don't even want that to happen, and this is a huge problem. In the Biden administration plan, as a matter of fact, they also undercut themselves because they described the plan as going forward with this what they call a partnership between the government, a public-private partnership. Okay, right, where the government and the private sector will work together to protect our electric grid. But that's been going on for years. It went on during the Obama administration. It happened with the Trump administration. It's happening now. And this clearly, they've been given every opportunity for years to make this public-private partnership work, and it doesn't work. The reason is because the government is the junior partner in this partnership. And it's an excuse to say, well, let the utilities do it. We're going to trust that the utilities are going to do it. We'll tell them what, we'll give them data, we'll sort of tell them to do and then trust them to do it.
Right.
And they do it. They're the private sector. They're not responsible for national security. They don't have a culture of national security the way the Department of Defense does, or the Department of Homeland Security or intelligence community. You can't expect the private sector, which is all about making money and profits. That's their bottom line. That's what
they make money.
That's what they're supposed to do. You can't turn around and then say, well, take over this very complicated national security problem and solve it for us. They don't have the competence to do it, and they don't even want to do it. They're right that it's the government's job to do it. And the Biden administration, both by canceling that executive order. Shall I describe? I'd like to talk about that executive order.
Yeah, please go ahead.
If I could, the executive order that got canceled today.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, President Trump very wisely, one of the recommendations that's come out of the community of people like myself, that have been advising the government how to protect our electric grids.
Correct.
That we really should end the practice that the private sector engages in buying critical equipment for our electric grid from foreign countries, especially China. We buy transformers. We shouldn't be buying things called SCADAs. These are supervisory control and data acquisition systems. They're basically control systems. They're not just in the electric grid, but they're everywhere in our electronic critical infrastructures. They control the way electricity flows in the transformers. They control the way the stoplights work in traffic control. They control locomotive. They control air traffic control. They control the way water flows through a pipe. There's millions of these little SCADAs. They're little computers. Back when I was growing up, when I was a young man back in the 70s, we didn't have SCADAs. Before the microelectronics revolution happened, we had hundreds of thousands of skilled blue-collar workers who did these things. They would watch the electricity flow through a meter and regulate the way the electricity flows. They would watch a meter to see how the water is flowing through that pipe. And one of the big advantages you had of having those blue-collar workers is they were smart guys and they knew how to fix the system if anything went wrong. Okay? Now the SCADAs, they've replaced all of them. They were basically our blue-collar army. We didn't realize it at the time, but they were our blue-collar army that was available to repair our critical infrastructures if anything catastrophically happened. But this was before cyber warfare and EMP became public knowledge, and nobody expected anything could go wrong in a catastrophic way. So you would need that huge blue-collar army. And so the utilities, basically replaced all these guys with the SCADAs. And now you can run a whole city, with 6 people, through the SCADAs. But if anything goes wrong with the SCADAs, you're a dead duck, and the SCADAs are extremely vulnerable to cyber attack and EMP. And so that's the problem. The Russians and the Chinese, they did not do that. Their electric grids, and they are national security states. Whenever they do, and everything, they don't really have a private sector. Theoretically, Russia has a private sector. Theoretically, China has a private sector. But in reality, everything in China, everything in Russia answers to the government. It's run by the government. They still do centralized planning. And the first thing they think of when they do anything in either of those countries is, what are the national security implications of what I'm doing? They're not looking at the bottom line. How do I maximize the profits? How do I maximize convenience to my customers and keep costs low? They don't care about that. They're not a free market economy. Not really. They're priority is national security. And so when they were organizing their electric grids during the Cold War, they said, well, electricity is really foundational to our national security. And if we replace all of these guys with SCADAs, it makes us vulnerable. So they didn't do that. They stuck with what are called retro technologies, electromechanical systems, having a lot of people, their version of the blue collar guys in the system. So that if anything goes wrong, you've got a huge blue collar army that can fix stuff. But also, the technologies are older technologies that are much less vulnerable to cyber attacks and EMP attacks. And that's why they attack us with impunity, because they know we can't really fight back. They're not as vulnerable as we are. So they can do things like have this woman, this Margarita Simonian, threaten to black out the United States over the Ukrainian crisis and not worry about it, because they know that if they did that, we can't do anything back. And I would add that when she said that publicly, it actually was good news from my point of view, because if Russia really planned to do it, they wouldn't tell us. They'd just do it. Okay. So when she made the threat, I said, "Oh, thank goodness." They're just doing this to send out a balloon to let the Biden administration know what they can do, and that they may well be willing to do it in a crisis, but they're not going to go and take over Ukraine just yet. Because if they hadn't said that, then the situation would be much more dangerous, and they might well have invaded Ukraine and then blacked us out if we did anything. If we had made a move, or if NATO made any kind of a move that looked like they were going to interfere. We're not out of the woods yet. I think they're going to. It's a very good possibility that they're going to go back and take over Ukraine. Before Biden was elected, all of us were predicting the Biden administration would be tested. Well, this is one of the tests. Okay, they wanted to reach out and poke the Biden administration and see what they would do, and I don't think they're impressed. So they're going to go back and recalculate and say, well, are we going to, maybe this is the time. Maybe this president is so weak and America isn't going to protect itself against cyber and EMP type threats. So now is the time when we can replace the United States as the leader of the world order. So that's the risk. This was a test, and fortunately they didn't invade. But what a pathetic response this is. This 100-day plan, which was initially a good thing, but then they also did some things, as I mentioned in the article. Why did the Biden administration have to tell them it was a draft plan? Just a draft plan, okay? And a draft plan that's 6 pages long, only 6 pages long to protect the electric grid, And then the last blunder, of course, is to say, well, the way this plan is going to be implemented is through a public-private partnership. In other words, we're going to continue doing what we've been doing for years unsuccessfully, and trusting our utilities to protect the electric grid. And then they came up with the Trump executive order. I meant to talk to that. I'm sorry I didn't get right to it.
Okay. That
executive order, well, I did mention, it's supposed to reduce our dependency on foreign supplied SCADAs and transformers, especially from China. It's insane for us to be buying transformers and SCADAs from China and putting them into our electric grid. They can design these things, and probably are designing them with easier attack by cyber. They can be designing them so that they're easier to destroy by EMP attacks. Even if they're not basically selling us equipment which is designed to fail when they decide to push a button. Okay, it's manufactured in China, and so they understand that equipment, and they can lay their plans for how to destroy that equipment better than they designed it. They probably understand it even better than the people in the United States that are purchasing it. We didn't design that equipment. We didn't manufacture that equipment. They did. So they know exactly what the vulnerabilities of that equipment are.
Correct.
And I can't believe that the Biden administration had canceled that executive order after what happened to Mumbai. Because the Indian response, one of the main reasons that India was so vulnerable to the cyber attack. So all they had to do was the cyber. They didn't have to do nuclear EMP or anything else.
Right.
Just cyber, and they blacked out a city of 20 million people. They could have blacked out the whole Indian subcontinent because India has unwisely been purchasing transformers and skaters from China.
From
And the Indian officials said to their prime minister, we've got to stop this. We're not going to buy any more stuff from China. We've got to immediately replace all our skaters and transformers because this is making us incredibly vulnerable.
right.
This back in October of last year. And so then what does the Biden administration do? You know, they cancel the Trump executive order that's designed to end our dependency on importing foreign equipment so that it should be made in America, okay? And in other words, and that sends a message to, not only does it send a message, but it continues the reality that we're going to continue buying stuff from China and from other foreign countries, you know, which increases our vulnerability. Let me just say one last thing about this. And it's not just China, you know. It's unwise to buy foreign equipment, even from our allies. You know, the lives of 330 million Americans depend upon these transformers and these skaters that run our electric grid. Even our allies. I mean, I do believe we can trust our allies, Germany and South Korea, for example, where we get a lot of our electronics, our critical electronics. But the chain of custody, when you're delivering a transformer from Germany to the United States, or from South Korea to the United States, or any SCADA system, there's a long chain of custody, you know, that this goes through, and it's not secure. You know, it's just like ordering a refrigerator. You know, there's nobody watching that refrigerator as it gets shipped to the United States. It's a golden opportunity for Russian, Chinese, North Korean, Iranian agents to intercept that equipment as it's coming to us and put a bug into it, replace a chip, something like that, and set it up so that when it's installed on our grid, it can be sabotaged. I mean, has our government learned nothing from the Stuxnet worm? You know, we worked with Israel to develop the Stuxnet worm, according to the Obama administration, and we managed to insert the Stuxnet worm into Iran's uranium centrifuges, even though those things are protected like Fort Knox. You know, they're in underground facilities, hardened underground facilities. They're patrolled and watched by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. But we managed to get past all that and still put the Stuxnet worm into their centrifuges, which damaged and destroyed a lot of their centrifuges and set back their nuclear program for a while. Now, like I said, I mean, those centrifuges were protected like Fort Knox. When transformers and SCADAs are coming to us, you know, from Germany or South Korea, these things aren't protected like Fort Knox. They're not protected at all. You know, it's just like ordering a refrigerator. They get about as much protection as a refrigerator would get, which is no protection at all. So it's a golden opportunity, even when you're buying from allies, to intercept those things and put a bug into them that they can then turn on when they decide they want to. That's why the equipment, the critical equipment, should be made in the USA. You know, and that was the object of President Trump's executive order. Make the transformers here, make the SCADAs here. Everything we need that sustains the lives of 330 million Americans should be made here in the USA, where we can have a better chance of watching it and securing it, making sure it's done right, and understanding it too. You know, and you know,
if I may ask,
buying this equipment from foreign suppliers makes no more sense than letting China build our aircraft carriers or letting China build our nuclear weapons. You know, you wouldn't trust them to do that. You know, why are you trusting them with the electric grid? Now I'll shut up and let you get it.
Thank you, Dr. Pro. I was reading on here, you said Russia's electric grid relies heavily on, you mentioned it, but I want you to explain what that is, on retro technologies like electromechanical controls that are invulnerable or less vulnerable to electromagnetic pulse and cyber attack. Russia is the world's leading manufacturer of vacuum tube electronics, not from backwardness, but because these are million times less vulnerable to EMP than modern microelectronics, ubiquitous in U.S. critical infrastructures and military. So from my reading here, is it seems what you're saying is that Russia is much more prepared for an EMP than we are. If
Yeah,
that's what you're
that's
correct.
correct. Russia and China both. Yes, right. Uh, they when they designed their electric grid and all of their critical infrastructure systems, it was with a nuclear war in mind. You know, they never believe, as the West does, that you can't win a nuclear war. They did everything they could to prepare their societies to fight a nuclear war and to prevail in a nuclear war. And the electric grid is the most important of all the critical infrastructures. And so they've designed it in such a way that it's as hardened as they can make it against EMP and cyber warfare and physical sabotage and that sort of thing. And we haven't thought that way at all. It wasn't until the EMP Commission delivered its report in 2008 that the idea that the electric grid is foundational to our national security even came on our radar screen. Up until that point, our policy has been one of benign neglect toward the electric grid, telecommunications, water, the food chain, all of it. You know, we let the private sector do it. The private sector is the most cost-effective way, and it is the most cost-effective way. But nobody in the private sector thinks of their jobs in terms of national security. And that has left us with enormous vulnerabilities, you know, when it comes to cyber warfare and EMP warfare. And these executive orders that President Trump passed, you know, we're starting the process of trying to repair that neglected vulnerability. Fortunately, the Biden administration has not canceled the EMP executive order yet. I hope they won't. I don't think they will. I do have to give them praise there. I've actually been in communication with people in the administration who have asked for my help in implementing that executive order. So it seems that they, you know, that they get, at least they understand that we've got to move forward. And that's the most important of the executive orders, frankly, the EMP executive order. Once you're hardened against EMP, that's really the worst threat. If you can survive an EMP attack, you know, you can basically survive anything, any cyber bug that could be thrown at you. You can survive physical sabotage. You can survive, and you'll be better able to recover from hurricanes or survive a geomagnetic superstorm from the sun. You know, the nuclear EMP is the worst threat. So once you're hardened against that, you're protected against everything. So the Biden administration does continue to go down the right road there. But this was a huge mistake to cancel the other executive order, you know, because because how do we know that the transformers and SCADAs we're buying from China, you know, are not being designed to be vulnerable to EMP? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to do that. You know, undercutting the whole plan. You know, it was an important part of the plan to get America building the critical equipment here in America. You know, if American lives depend upon it, it should be made in the USA.
A question. You mentioned retro technologies. Can America, are we too far to be able to go as Russia, switch everything to these retro technologies? Can it be done? Can we do something similar as Russia has done?
Yes, we can. You know, let's see, I'm trying to remember the name of the gentleman. He was a member of Congress who was a good leader on this, a member of the Senate from the state of Maine. His name escapes me at the moment. But he actually passed an excellent bill maybe 2 years ago that was to look at this very question, you know, about reintroducing retro technologies into the U.S. electric grid. Okay. And the utilities are going in absolutely the opposite direction. They're in love with this thing they call the smart grid. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the smart grid.
What they want to do is it'll put a meter on everybody's house. You know, a little SCADA, a tiny micro SCADA that'll monitor the electricity going into your house.
Yep.
So that it'll be more efficient. It could lower your electric bills because that little computer will figure out, well, these guys don't really need all this electricity. They're not using it all the time. So we're only going to regulate it just to what you need. Okay. And that's from saving money. That's a good thing. But from a national security standpoint, you know, it makes every house vulnerable. You could a cyber bug can attack all those SCADAs, or the EMP can take them out, and then you don't even have any chance. Even individual homeowners who have emergency generators, for example,
Right.
might find that they can't protect themselves, because of that. So that's a really, from a national security standpoint, it's a bad idea. But we could have it both ways. One possibility, which I have proposed, is okay. Let the utilities go into the smart grid, but they should have you should at the control centers. You should have an alternate command post. Every control center should have an alternate command post. There are, I call it a command post because that's like in the military. That's not what the utilities call them. They call them control centers. There's every regional grid, has got a control center, where there are guys, that small number of people that I was telling you about before,
Right.
still regulate the electricity to the extent they can. And it's all based on this extremely vulnerable, advanced electronic technology. But we could have a backup system to that,
Okay.
have a trailer that's designed to be EMP hardened. A trailer like that only costs $100,000, okay? And then put retro technology in it, so that in addition to it being inside a Faraday cage, so that it's protected against the technology itself is less vulnerable or invulnerable. And it could even use vacuum tube type electronics, the way the Russians do, so that the electric equipment is 1,000,000 times less vulnerable to the EMP. And then in emergency, if we get hit with an EMP, we'll have trained these guys, exercised these guys to plug in the command post. So it's going to take over, and it will run. It'll keep the electric grid up, and we can run the system from there.
Right.
That will cost very little. The trailer can be mobile. So you can have it built someplace else and just bring it on site and leave it there on site. But train the guys to say, when you get in trouble and this smart control center that you're using, when the smart grid fails, as it inevitably will if it's attacked, here's your plan. You're going to go into this emergency command post, and you're going to rely on it to control the grid. So that's an example, one way of bringing retro technology back without sacrificing the economic and efficiency benefits of modern technology.
But let's say, before we move to China, what if, because it didn't happen, what if Russia had used an EMP? Like we know, and I want our audience to hear it from you, those who are watching, are you ready? From Dr. Pry. If Russia was to use an EMP on us, on America, is America at this moment, here we are in April 27, 2021, are we ready for any such attack?
No, we're not ready. The national electric grid would collapse. It would be destroyed. And as I mentioned before, and it wouldn't just be the electric grid. All the critical infrastructures depend upon the electric grid. Water won't flow without electricity. Fuel won't run through pipelines. And as a matter of fact, the EMP will couple into natural gas pipelines and cause huge explosions. Probably be firestorms in cities as a consequence of natural gas explosions happening. In 7 days, the nuclear reactors, when the big grid goes down, just like in Fukushima, Japan, they have to go back and rely on emergency generators and batteries. And those things will only last for about 7 days. And on the 7th day, they end up going Fukushima. You will end up with, radioactive steam explosions, and fuel rods in the cooling ponds will blow up, and they'll create huge plumes of radioactive material that will cover most of the country. We've got 100 nuclear power reactors in this country, all of which are potentially vulnerable to the EMP. And so it's not just the lights go out. That's bad enough, okay? but you'll also have all of these other catastrophes. It would be an unprecedented environmental catastrophe. You know, these natural gas pipelines go through forests. There would be forest fires everywhere. We have, millions of industries in this country that are run on SCADAs and electronic systems that are just gigantic chemistry sets. If anything goes wrong with them, they'll blow up and create noxious clouds of poisonous gas that can go everywhere. All along the Texas coast are oil refineries. If you look at those things, for example, they're gigantic chemistry sets. If anything goes wrong with them, they'll explode. You'll have fires, poison gases everywhere. But the worst thing is just the blackout. Because you can't live without water. Think of a blackout that doesn't last a couple of days or hours, but that lasts forever, which is what you're talking about. We would not be able to bring the grid back in time to save millions of lives. The EMP Commission estimated that if we had a nationwide blackout that lasted a year, we could lose up to 90% of our population through starvation, disease, and societal collapse. And this is just common sense. Prove it to yourself. How long can you live without water? Would you be able to drink? Look at in Venezuela. They had a blackout in Venezuela that lasted a few days, and people were drinking out of the sewers. That's going to kill you. You can't go drink out of streams and lakes and rivers. Even with all of our efforts to clean up the environment, it's still deadly. You'd be taking your life in your hands to go and drink out of a stream. And in the aftermath of EMP, the water purification plants that we use to take out the industrial wastes, the hospital wastes, the human wastes, these all back up. When blackouts happen, this stuff backflows into the rivers and lakes and streams. And so you'd be basically drinking hospital wastes and industrial wastes. And it would be far worse pollution than we ever had in the 19th century. You'd be creating this toxic environment that would be deadly to people. And then people wouldn't have, so in addition to having no water, there's only enough food in grocery stores to feed people at normal consumption rates for about 3 days. And then there's no more food. And it has to be replenished from the big regional food warehouses. But if the trucks don't run, the food isn't going to be coming in. Food in the regional food storehouses will begin spoiling on day one of the EMP because you need refrigeration, temperature control systems to keep the food fresh and wholesome and edible. And there's only enough food anyway to feed the whole country for 30 days, even in those regional food warehouses. So, the EMP Commission tried hard, but we couldn't figure out a way to keep 330 million Americans alive for a year with no food and no water. And, particularly an EMP would recreate in the country, the circumstances that cause famine in third world countries. People might say, well, our friends will save us. The Canadians will save us. The British will save us. The Japanese will send food, right?
Yeah.
But how do you offload the food? When the cranes don't work at the docks because there's no electricity, you're exactly the kind of situation you had in Somalia. You end up with huge quantities of food that are piled up in ports, but you can't get them off onto the trucks and into the hinterlands to feed people because the transportation infrastructure doesn't work. And so that's the kind of thing that happened. That's what would happen right now. Russia had delivered on its threat to make a cyber/EMP attack against the United States.
Okay. All right. Well, let's, with the time we have left, I want to switch now to the article you did on China. Because China also is, with all the situation with the South China Sea and the threats of going into Taiwan, and that possibility exists. They did. Can you explain what happened in in Mumbai? Right? Correct?
Yes, Mumbai. Right.
Could you explain what happened during that time?
Sure. Well, ever since the 1950s, when China annexed Tibet and took over Tibet, it has had an India dispute over the border with India in the high Himalayas. And periodically, China goes up there and tries to expand its borders at India's expense, mm-hmm. And that's what was happening recently. Except now, India is a nuclear weapons state,
yes.
And it's got nuclear missiles that can reach China's cities. So China hasn't been willing to be as much of a bully by using brute military force to just expand its borders. And the way the border conflicts are conducted are with Stone Age tactics. They'll use shovels and clubs and fists, and the Indians and Chinese
boxing.
Right. And this was going on back in October of last year in the border dispute.
Mm-hmm.
And China wanted to teach India a lesson, wanted to get India to back off and to surrender on that border. And
mm-hmm.
so they basically blacked out the city of Mumbai. It's extremely significant that they would do that. This is a city of 20 million people.
Wow.
They basically demonstrated to India that, hey, if we wanted to black out your whole country, we could do it. And then we'll take whatever we want, because you'll be helpless against us. Because the Indian military also depends on their electric grid, just the way our military does. Mm-hmm. Our military gets 99% of our electricity from the civilian grid. Same thing with India. And they would be militarily helpless if China did that.
Wow.
And that caused this internal crisis in India, where they woke up and said, we've got to get the Chinese equipment out of our grid because it's contributing to our vulnerability. But the other big lesson that we should take away from this, that the Biden administration can take from this, is that China and Russia too, we know now from the Ukraine situation, they consider this scenario what I call a blackout war. A blackout war of a huge city, or potentially of a whole country. They consider this less provocative than a so-called real shooting war in the high Himalayas between relatively small numbers of troops. You can't get big military forces up there in the Himalayas. We're talking about company-sized forces that are coming into conflict. But China actually, in its mind, would consider it more escalatory if they had small arms combat in the Himalayas, and it said, well, this is an option short of a shooting war. This is a safer, less escalatory thing to do against India, a nuclear power. Let's black out Mumbai, put 20 million people into the dark. Maybe let's put the whole country into the dark rather than have a so-called shooting war. This shows that in their military doctrine, they see this thing as a intermediate level of aggression, a safer way, a less escalatory way, something they're much more likely to do than engaging in an actual shooting war, and indeed, in their doctrine says it out loud. One of their military textbooks, it's a core military textbook in China on cyber warfare, is Shen Wei Guan's World War III, World War Total Information Warfare, and it basically describes the use of cyber warfare and EMP as a way of winning World War III without having to use
nuclear bombs,
without having to use conventional weapons, because you're attacking your enemy's technological Achilles heel. And we saw, I think Russia actually practiced this, but tried to do it quietly so that we wouldn't notice. Back in 2018, during their big military exercise called Vostok 18, the exercise itself got some attention. Didn't get as much attention as deserved because everybody was arguing over who was that Supreme Court justice that was falsely accused of sexual harassment. Kavanaugh. Right. Because all the media was more interested,
focused on that.
Kavanaugh's teenage sex life than they were on Vostok 18, which simulated a World War III against the United States. And it was conducted with China, by the way. In the scenario, China and Russia were working together, allies, in World War III against the United States. And it was it might have been the biggest military exercise in history. They mobilized 300,000 troops, 20,000 tanks and other armored vehicles, 1,000 aircraft. Very big thing, got very little attention in the United States. I wrote an article, I was one of the few to write an article about it. But in effect, what they were doing, it was simulating an invasion of NATO in Siberia.
Wow.
But before Vostok 18 happened, okay, which was obviously a very highly visible thing that we would notice,
Right.
what they hoped we wouldn't pay much attention to was that about a month or two before Vostok 18 happened, they made hundreds of cyber attacks on electric utilities in the United States, and I think that was, so I think that the Russians did just the way, in their doctrine, they described this in the same way as the Chinese do in their doctrine, that maybe you don't have to do the real Vostok 18. Maybe you won't have to go that far. Maybe you'll be able to win by turning out the lights in the other country through cyber and EMP attacks. And so we saw that that's how the Chinese think in India. And back in Vostok 18, we could see that's how the Russians think about that exercise. I think that they, the secret war, the secret plan is to take us out in exactly the way that Margarita Simonian threatened, with a nationwide blackout. And then they wouldn't even have to do the shooting war, okay? But the Russians are very conservative, and what they'd probably do in a real war is, okay, we're gonna do this cyber attack and try to black out the United States and win the war that way. But then if it didn't work satisfactorily, or maybe even if it did, because the Russians like to see the rubble bounce, maybe they'd then go to the shooting war. The shooting war could be, against all of our allies that are counting on us to be at their defense, and invade NATO, take that over, China take over Taiwan and the South China Sea and whatever.
Right.
Their allies, North Korea, might decide to move against South Korea, Iran against Israel.
I wanted to ask you another question, because I was thinking, something came to my mind. Do you believe that we here in America believe that Russia or China may be bluffing? Maybe they're bluffing. They're saying they're going to do this, and they're just doing, but they're really not going to do it, because if they try to do something, we're going to retaliate against them. Yeah. Do you think there are a lot of people here that just, Russia and China, they're just bluffing? They don't really mean it. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I think that's the mainstream view in Washington. I think there are too many people, maybe even a majority of people, who in the Pentagon and the White House that think that way. And among the average Americans, we've sort of drunk our own Kool-Aid about mutual assured destruction. Yeah. And they're convinced, well, the United States has still got nuclear weapons. And if somebody did that, they blacked out the United States, we'd use nuclear weapons, we'd escalate to the nuclear level. And that's a very shallow way of thinking. That's not thinking like a chess player. That's, if it were to actually happen, okay, just imagine with the President of the United States, all right? And just try to, and if you think about that for just a few minutes and try to think about it seriously, you can see that just doesn't stand up to reason, So the United States has been blacked out. Now, if it's been done purely by a cyber attack, nobody's been killed yet, okay?
Correct.
If you're doing the nuclear EMP attack, there will have been a lot of airplanes that have fallen out of the sky.
Yes.
We'll have a lot of people that have been killed, okay? But the cities haven't been destroyed. We're not talking about tens of millions of people killed yet, okay? Which is what's going to happen if you push the button and start a nuclear war.
Correct.
The clock is also ticking now that the electric grid is off. The clock is ticking toward exterminating your civilization, losing 90% of your people in a year if the grid doesn't come back. It doesn't take long for people to starve to death, to die from lack of water. And why are you going to war? To protect the sovereignty of South Korea, to protect the sovereignty of Japan, of Taiwan, to protect our NATO allies who have been unwilling to invest in their own defense to adequate levels to deter Russia? Are we sacrificing the American people for that? That doesn't make sense if you're an American president and you're acting in American interests. If you're an American president and you're thinking of American interests, your duty is to save the lives of Americans.
Americans, correct.
You're going to use every resource left that's working, and there's not going to be that much that does work, without electricity. But everything that's available, I think, logically, that an American president should be trying to bring the grid back, trying to get the water running again, trying to get the food supplies flowing again, so that millions of Americans don't die. And that's going to take a while. It's going to take time. By the time we're done with that, Russia will be in the English Channel, China will be in Taiwan, North Korea will be in South Korea, and we won't be able to do anything about it. And frankly, that's what an American president should do. It would be our deterrent. We're the ones who are bluffing. It's been a bluff all through the Cold War. And fortunately, it's worked. But the credibility of that huge bluff. What do I mean when I say we've been bluffing? How plausible is it that we're actually going to get a nuclear war with North Korea to save South Korea? How many cities is it worth to us to save South Korea? Right? How many American lives is it worth to save NATO in a nuclear war? Are we going to go to war? That's what NATO is counting on, by the way.
There we go.
They have it invested in their security. They think that the war is going to be fought over their heads with missile exchanges between Russia and the United States. So, and they're counting on Russia bluffing. Okay, but we're the ones that are bluffing. Are we really going to do that? Are we that stupid that we're going to sacrifice, hundreds of millions of our people in a nuclear war with Russia to save Germany and France, who don't care enough about their own security to do what Trump was asking them to do in his administration, and meet their obligations under the agreement with NATO? Spend 2% of your defense budget, less than we spend. We're only asking them to spend 2%. They don't even spend that, most of them. And so we're going to go to nuclear war to make up for their failure to invest in their own security. I think that people who think that these threats from Russia and China are just bluffs have got it exactly backwards. We're actually the ones who are bluffing. When you do the calculus of risk and benefit in terms of what would we logically do when we're actually pushed this way, and this bluff that we're running is getting less and less credible as our nuclear triad continues to deteriorate. It hasn't been modernized. The Biden administration, a lot of them are arguing against. They want to ban our ICBMs. The warheads in our nuclear arsenal. Many of our scientists don't even know if they'll work. They're 50 years old. Everything in Russia and China is brand new and does work. And we also know that when it comes to Ukraine, what kind of bluff is it when you're taking over Crimea? Okay, in the Obama administration, that's not bluffing. They seized Crimea.
They went in, yes.
What did we do about it? We had a treaty. It's called the Bucharest Agreement. It was signed by Bill Clinton and the United Kingdom to protect Ukraine from exactly that sort of thing. What did we do? It turned out we were bluffing, didn't it? We didn't do anything. And Russia has been fighting a war in eastern Ukraine, okay, for many years, killing, I think it's 14,000 Ukrainians.
14,000. Around
due to their aggression now. All right. What have we done about that? We've complained about it. We've levied sanctions. And I think Russia hasn't taken Ukraine over. In part, they may well do it because I think that's Putin and Russia's larger geostrategic goal, to reconstitute the Soviet Union eventually. But I think what they're doing now is part of their plan to undermine the credibility of NATO, to demonstrate every day that Ukraine is crucified in such a public way, shows to NATO that the United States and even the United Kingdom do not honor their security agreements. Ukraine is just a great, the ongoing crucifixion of Ukraine by Russian military forces. Simonian is right. Margarita Simonian was right in her statement that the Russian military could run over Ukraine in 2 days. They could.
They,
They could run over the frontline NATO states and Ukraine in 3 days. Our own war games show that. We can't win a war against Russia, trying to defend the frontline NATO states or trying to defend Ukraine. We lose every one of those war games. And we lose against China when it comes to a war over Taiwan. And they know that. We're the ones who are bluffing.
so the ones that are bluffing, it's not them, it's us here in America, correct? It's from
Right. Right.
Okay.
They haven't done it yet is because, well, Sun Tzu, the famous Chinese military philosopher, read by everybody, by us, including the Russians, is the China and Russia are more patient than us. They take a longer view. And Sun Tzu says that the greatest victory is to win without war. And right now, they are winning without war. They've been winning without war for a long time. It's going their way, And so, and they see us basically destroying ourselves.
Correct.
It doesn't make sense for them to go to war right now. They're chess players. I'm sure the Russian general staff, if I was in the Russian general staff and I was advising Putin, I would say, don't invade Ukraine yet. Don't get any kind of big war with the United States yet. The United States isn't done destroying itself yet. We're falling apart culturally. We're underfunding our military. We're on the verge of destroying our economy. Let's see how far the United States falls. They're going to wait for the United States to hit rock bottom before they actually launch a war. That's what Sun Tzu would advise. That's what any rational military advisor would tell them to do. Unfortunately, the tide of history is going their way right now.
Yeah, it is. That's what I've noticed when it comes to the news, how the Chinese government is making bases and naval bases in many parts of the world. So they're beginning to move around the world doing their thing. And I think we think we need a little humility, I think, to know that we're going to have to make some changes, and we got to make them quick, and we got to be careful, because I don't think, and from my opinion, I agree with you. I think the U.S. is the one that's bluffing, and I don't think Russia and China are bluffing. If they get the opportunity, they will use it. Like you said, they're just waiting for the right time. And you also mentioned when you talked about the EMP, I believe that if the EMP happened, it would give them an opportunity to invade and come in, because that's it. Everything's turned off. What do you think? Would the Russians or the Chinese think about invasion after an EMP occurs?
Of the United States?
Of the U.S.?
I don't think so. I know a lot of people think that. I don't think they'd want the problems. I think they'd be content to let us just struggle along. We would become a big version of Ukraine for them. Okay. Our suffering would be a great example to the whole world. The ancient Assyrians, they're like the Assyrians, from the Old Testament. Aggressive, ruthless, military dictatorships that have no heart. And when the Assyrians wanted to send a message and conquer the world, at one point they conquered Jerusalem, and they skinned alive the leaders and the people who had resisted, and hung their skinned corpses off the walls of the city. And that act of terror enabled them to conquer much more easily. Everybody else putting up resistance. I think they'd be perfectly happy, just as they're using Ukraine now, the suffering that's been going on in Ukraine for years and years. Their preferred way of conquering is to have people just surrender and open their doors to them. And they can say, do you want to have happen to you what's happening now in the United States? So instead of coming and rescuing us, by repairing our infrastructures and stuff, I think they'd prefer to just use the United States as an example, right? So that they would have the rest of the world order. And I don't think they'd want us to come back either. They're totalitarian states. They'd be concerned about if America did come back. Our economy and our military is the only possible rival to them in the future. They wouldn't make the mistake that we made during the Cold War, or at least this is the way they think. I don't think it was a mistake for us to try to help Russia, all right? I think the Clinton administration didn't do enough. I think the Clinton administration lost Russia, all right? And, all of those billions of dollars we spent in trying to turn Russia into a free market, free political system were wasted because the Clinton administration had people who were sympathetic to socialism in charge of its policies, and they dealt with the nomenclatura in Russia. The Russian elites who wanted to bring back communism and state-run enterprises and were out of the military and the intelligence services. They didn't go and give their resources to the average Russian, the Russian people, and try to build trust with them. The State Department would have been better off just going down the street and passing out $100 bills to average Russians to show them that America is their friend and that we wanted a good future for them.
Right.
It didn't happen that way. The way the Clinton administration did it, is the Russian kleptocracy. People like Putin ended up taking over. But those guys, if they had won the Cold War, they would have eliminated us, because they wanted to complete the victory. And that's what they were expecting us to do, frankly. They were they didn't believe that we were actually trying to help Russia become a democracy and enter the circle of nations. They're so paranoid, that's how they think, that they thought that this was all a plot to keep Russia down, and they still think so, I think at one point they kicked the Boy Scouts out of Russia because they thought that they were some kind of clandestine effort to undermine the patriotism of Russians or something. But that's so. I think they would want us. They'd be perfectly happy to have the United States annihilated and eliminated as an actor on the world stage permanently, so that they could control the rest of the globe and dominate the world order.
Okay, boy, you have given us a lot of information tonight, a lot of great info. Just looking back at what we talked about between Russia and China, of the two, which of them? Because we didn't mention Iran and also North Korea, because we know that they also have the capabilities to do something with America. Of all these, which one do you think is the one that we need to focus more on, or all of them, before we finish tonight? What would you say, Dr. Pry?
Unfortunately, we do have to regard all of them as a united threat against us. This is something else Washington doesn't understand. I don't know. They don't seem to get that there really is a strategic partnership between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran in international terrorism. That this is the new bloc. We're in a new Cold War, and these are the allies on the other side. They all work together. They've even signed treaties with each other.
Correct.
For some reason, Washington, the State Department, wants to think that we are the only ones that have got a global alliance, the NATO alliance, and that our treaties count, but the treaties they sign with each other don't count. I don't understand that reasoning. But you can see it, and we make huge strategic blunders all the time. For example, the Trump administration made the same mistake, playing the strategy. For example, if you want to get North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons,
right.
The department for decades has been doing what's called playing the China card against North Korea. In other words, we go with our hat in our hand to Beijing and beg them to try to help us to get them to pressure North Korea.
Right, I remember that.
Weapons. Look how well that has worked. I mean, we've been doing that before North Korea even tested a nuclear weapon. Okay, and now North Korea can reach us and hit us with an EMP, with ICBMs, and attack our cities, and we still haven't given up on the idea of playing the China card. There is no China card. North Korea is China's
united.
They are a nuclear weapon state because they were helped to that by Russia and China, and Russia and China want them to be a nuclear weapon state that threatens us. North Korea never threatens Russia or China, okay? So why should they don't have no interest in denuclearizing North Korea? So yeah, all of these are they are working together, and we have to consider them together. Now, if I had to signal out one of those states that I'm most worried about,
Right.
it would be Russia.
Russia.
And that's because Russia has a fragile economy, and they have invested heavily in their nuclear and conventional capabilities, just like the Soviet Union did. And they can't do that forever. They're not going to be able to carry that enormous burden of armaments forever. Eventually, it'll cause their economy to collapse. All right. So why are they doing that? They must have learned from the Cold War that by investing so heavily in the nuclear and conventional forces, that it puts strains on their regime that are very difficult for them to sustain. Whereas this is not the case with China. China has a much better economy than Russia does. They can much more easily sustain the burden of armaments they have built. So there's internal pressure on Russia to use the military machine it has built before their economy collapses, and before we modernize our forces to catch up with them, or before China catches up with them. They're way ahead of China too, in their nuclear arsenal for sure.
Yes.
So this is sort of Russia's moment, and it's a moment that can last for years, but it's probably not going to last for decades. So I'm very concerned about the Russian general staff meeting with Putin at some point and saying, our economy can't take it anymore. We either have to use this machine, or become obsolete, And Putin's not the kind of guy to pass up strategic opportunities, as he's proven in Ukraine. Still, I think the thing that is preventing a World War III right now is our own disintegration as a civilization. They see us we're tearing down our own monuments. We're teaching our kids to hate America. Our youth representative goes in front of the United Nations and denounces the United States as a systemically racist, evil country. Basically, they love it. We're obviously we're overspending on things that are not threats, like climate change. We're gutting the military. The Biden administration. We're talking about banning the ICBM, for example. Oh, Russia would love that. Right now, if they wanted to launch a disarming nuclear attack, we've got 400 ICBMs that they've got to worry about. So they have to take out those 400 ICBMs, plus the 2 ballistic missile submarine bases, plus 3 strategic bomber bases. Okay, if we ban the ICBM, the target set in the United States is reduced from more than a little over 400 to just 5 targets. All they have to do is attack the 3 bomber bases and the 2 ballistic missile submarine bases. What a great deal for Russia if we are stupid enough to do that. So they're going to bide their time for a while and see just how far they're going to wait for us to hit rock bottom. Just how far are we going to deteriorate before they decide to go to war? And maybe they can win without war. If Antifa and BLM and these radical socialists take over, they might be able to win without war.
I totally agree. I think in the moral structure of the country, they're looking at that, and when people start fighting on the streets, and they're the Russians and the Chinese say, well, let them have it, let them fight each other, and we'll pick up the pieces at the end.
We're even not becoming a threat. We're becoming less and less of a threat.
Correct.
The reason they threatened, the biggest fear they had of us was not our military, but our freedom.
Correct.
Our culture that they feared most.
Yes.
That's the thing that they feared most, and we're losing that. They see us moving towards socialism, becoming a less and less free people, becoming a people who understand freedom less and less. Who want to make big government. It must delight the hearts of Moscow and Beijing to see the masks, for example.
Right.
I think they are pleasantly surprised that there hasn't been a backlash from ordinary Americans to say it's ridiculous. This is they're I'm not going to close my restaurant. I'm not going to let the government, dictate my life. Coronavirus, which is not that serious a threat. Americans are looking a lot more like sheep than like eagles, and that's what they want. They want us to be the way their people are, to be like sheep. And if we become sheep and are not free anymore, that's a threat. The biggest aspect of our threat has been eliminated, and they won't have to fight a World War III if all we are is sheep.
Exactly, and it'll be very easy for them to achieve that if we've coalesced into their kind of system. Be easier for them to come and do whatever they want.
Tyranny with their own hands, and we'll be focused on building a big welfare, just like Germany. They'll win. They can win World War III without war if we become like Germany and France, and we cannibalize our military power, so that we're growing our welfare state. So we have to take huge loans from China. So China basically owns us.
Yes, that's correct.
To do whatever it wants, and roll over Ukraine, reestablish the borders of the Soviet Union, and we won't care about that anymore because we're so focused on climate change and solving our so-called institutional racism. Our own government will end up regarding our so-called domestic violent extremists as a bigger threat than Russia and China. And so the focus of the Biden administration seems to be much more inwards, in terms of changing the country
from inside.
Real threat. Another thing that gives them great comfort. What a symbol of having 25,000 troops in Washington, D.C. Why? To protect Washington from the American people. This is the kind of government they like. They want to see more. Yeah, right. So if we change our stripes and we become a tyranny like them, we're not a threat anymore. Not fundamentally.
Well, Dr. Pry, it's been a wonderful evening. And we talked about a lot of stuff, a lot of information, a lot of things for people to, hopefully all those who have watched here on Are You Ready will take advantage of it. And I want to thank you, Dr. Pry, for being with us tonight and with all that you shared regarding China and Russia. I hope those who are watching ask God for discernment, because this is great information. And Dr. Pry, once again, thank you for being with us on Are You Ready? And thank you for sharing. Any last words you would like to say to the people? Are you ready? To them?
Well, we're not ready. Not for the.
We're not ready. That's it.
Despair, don't despair. We have. We can be masters of our own fate. Don't feel that just because you're don't think of yourself as a small individual who's helpless against Washington. The founders understood that, freedom doesn't come from Washington. Freedom comes from you. Yeah. Your ability to refuse, your ability to say no, even if it's a gesture like, I'm not going to wear that mask anymore. Your defiance is your freedom. And, it's up to all of us to defend our freedom in our own lives and for our friends and neighbors. Freedom can come from the grassroots. That's how the American Revolution happened. When the Soviet tyranny, was originally overthrown, they were the greatest tyranny in history. The political elites who ran the Soviet Union were the greatest tyrants in history. They had an apparatus at their disposal, which is unprecedented in history, in the KGB and the gulags and the psychiatric hospitals. But they were thrown on the ash heap of history in just a couple of years, with surprisingly little bloodshed, because communism failed.
Correct.
And the God that was communism failed, and the Russians and the people of Eastern Europe lost their faith in that false God, and they said no, and they were gone. You know, we
That's
can do that here in this country too, and we can take the country back by our refusal to be sheep.
That's right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Pry. I hope and pray you have a very blessed evening. And thank you. Thank you for all that you shared. Once again, honored to have had you on our program. And for all those who have watched, please, if you like this program, please subscribe to Are You Ready? Share it and spread it all over. Let other people hear what has been said. All right. Well, everybody, have a very blessed evening. Thank you for joining us here on Are You Ready? Once again, Dr. Pride, thank you for being with us. And I hope you have a great evening, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a blessed evening. Thank you. Good night, everybody.